And look at the odds for all 4 1 seeds to make the Final Four when this tournament started. That was a 13-1 prop bet if you wanted to make it at ESPN BET. More on that in a minute, but that is where we are at now. It is reality. Duke, Houston, Auburn, Florida, all in the Final Four. All right, welcome friends and fam into the ESPN BET Live studio. Tyler Fulghum, Joe Fortenbaugh holding down the fort. Feels kind of lonely in here after our last few shows. We've been 4 wide on the desk.
Feels a lot like the last 2 weeks were a complete waste of time, us just getting to these 4-1 seeds. But at least we got to lose some money in the process. A lot of fun there.
Anita Marks will join us along the way. Buster Olney also going to stop by to talk torpedoes after the Bronx Bombers hit missiles all over Yankee Stadium this weekend. But we'll start with that Final Four in the men's bracket. Joe, is there value in the championship market on the men's side?
So you looked at the prices we flashed up a few seconds ago pre-tournament, right? And Auburn was sitting there plus 550. You and I had this conversation on Saturday about this team. I don't think there's a lot of value in Florida or Duke. It's not to say they're not great teams, but the value would lie in a team like Auburn who was plus 550 before the tournament started. Now, let's assess that. Plus 550, and what was the narrative? Well, this team's struggling. They've lost 3 of 4. Something's wrong. They're probably the most vulnerable 1 seed. Okay, that was all fair. So what we did was we played out 2 weeks worth of action, 4 total games. In that time, Auburn's 4-0. They're 3-1 against the spread. They're winning those games by an average of 12 points per game. Is it fair to say maybe we've answered those questions? Because if we had, I'd have to believe this price would be closer to plus 350. But instead, we're still sitting here 5-1. Pre-tournament was plus 550. I think that's where the value is. And oh, by the way, all the 1 seeds are here as projected. So the fact that that didn't move or hardly moved at all, I think that's where the value lies is Auburn.
I would like to see Auburn win. Again, my bracket has them cutting down the nets. I think the value, you're right, lies there. I just look at the way that Duke and Florida have played, and it's really hard to get away from them. Now, you're not going to extract as much value wagering one of those teams, so here's something to consider. How about making a Florida-Duke matchup in the championship game by a money line parlay in the Final Four?
Those have been gold this tournament.
There you go. Florida money line, Duke money line, plus 148 at ESPN BET. You cash that, and then you don't care who wins the final. You got the matchup that you wanted, or you can reinvest that money however you would like. Would that interest you at all? I know you like the value on Auburn, but just money line with those 2 teams looking so dominant?
Given how chalky the tournament's been, if you don't want to get caught laying the points, 5.5 in the Houston game, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you want to just shrink it to picking the winners and putting it together like that at a plus money price, I don't see anything wrong with that. The one thing I would bring up, and this isn't to knock Florida, that's who I picked to win the tournament before it started bracket-wise, which is blown up, but if the whole season was just the last 2 weeks, we'd have more questions about Florida than we would Auburn. UConn almost had them, and Texas Tech choked that game away. Like, there's a very good argument to be made that Texas Tech should be here and Florida should be at home. So when we're questioning all these things about Auburn, just remember the Gators are the one that bring just as many question marks into this game.
All right, before we move on to Anita Marks in just a second, we have mentioned 3 of the 4 Final Four teams. What if you like Houston out there? What if you're a Cougars backer?
Classic Houston just getting left to dry. All right, so they're sitting out there at plus 450 is the price. I think you can extract a little bit additional value if you skip the futures price and just do the old moneyline rollover parlay, right? What does that mean? They're plus 180 right now in this matchup against Duke. So just play them on the money line, which is essentially your futures ticket as well. You need the team to win. If you end up winning that game, you take the initial investment plus the winnings and you roll it over into the money line for the national championship game. If that national championship game is plus 105 for Houston or anything higher, you'd be getting a payout somewhere around 5-1 or greater, which is 50 cents more than what you're looking at right now at plus 450. So it's a way to get yourself a little extra value rather than playing the standard futures price. Takes a little bit more work, but could be worth more in the long run.
All right, we've waited long enough, Joe. Welcome in our good friend Anita Marks. Good evening to you, Anita. Now, before we get to how you're playing the Final Four, you're already sitting there with some new shoes in the closet. Why is that?
Mama's got a few new pairs of shoes, Tyler. And I need it because I've lost my butt betting on the tournament. Let's win some money on some futures bets, right? So I had all number 1s advancing. Hence, here we are, and that was what, 13-1, I believe, when the tournament began. So I'm feeling pretty good. I'm playing with ESPN Bet House money. So let's dive into it, right? I like the field which is Florida and Houston over Duke and Auburn at plus 140. I just, with all due respect, Joe, I love this Gators team. I think they check all the boxes. This is the NCAA tournament. Crazy stuff happens, right? But I think they're the most balanced team still left. They've got a great defense, elite three-point defense. They shoot the ball from anywhere, and they've got the size to go up against the other three teams remaining. And as for Houston, here's some trends for you. NCAA history, tournament history, the coach with the most experience, most Final Four experiences, has gone 119 and 69 straight up. That's Coach Sampson with the Houston Cougars. How about this? Home sweet home, baby. Final Four. The team that this will be the 9th time that a team like Houston will be playing the Final Four, eating their own home porridge, sleeping in their own beds, right? In their state of Texas. 7 of those 8 teams have gone on to advance from the Final Four to play in the championship. So I love the trends there. And last but not least, Walter Clayton Jr., baby, MOP, most outstanding player in this tournament. He put on a show against Texas Tech. If Florida's going to win the championship, what I have them doing, I think that young man, who, by the way, was a football recruit, 4-star football recruit, nobody wanted him playing college basketball. Dude's going to win the MOP if Florida wins the tournament.
Back here on ESPN Bet Live, we found out the Final Four teams over the weekend, and we've already got lines posted at ESPN Bet for those games on Saturday. Florida and Duke were the favorites in public brackets, and they're favored here as well, although the Gators are laying just 2.5. Duke a 5.5-point favorite. All right, Joe Fortenbaugh, let's dive in. We'll start with Duke and Houston. 7 days out, so plenty of time to adjust, but what are you doing with this game?
So this game's already moved. Open 4.5, now up to 5.5. So we've seen Duke money early. Kind of like Houston here. Kind of like Houston here. Hang with me on this one. But I think we're taking a gamble, and for good reason. The gamble's in just a moment. We're getting 5.5 with the #1 defense in the country. 2 teams that play at a relatively slower pace. Total of 136. So those 5.5 in a lower scoring game, more valuable than catching 5.5 in a game with a total of 174, like we saw with Duke and Alabama, right? The variance there with the shooting and the pacing can really blow you out of the water. So that's number 1. Here's the key, though. Duke has been on fire through the entire tournament. I'm not just talking like one game, possible regression like we like to discuss. 4 games in this tournament, 56% from the floor, 47% from deep. When the law of averages comes for you, it buries you. Case in point, Alabama over the weekend. Alabama was red hot. Came off a monster historic game and then got blown out of the water by Duke because they couldn't knock down their shots. That's what happened. So maybe it doesn't end here, but you throw a great Houston defense up against Duke, who's due for some shooting regression. There's a chance this is the Duke off night, and we're there to capitalize with the 5.5 points. Well, like I said, it's a bit of a gamble here.
It's a big gamble with the way Duke has looked. I'll just make it simple, Duke money line, and maybe you can add another leg to that, which we can discuss in just a little bit. But Duke seemed, the thing about this matchup is we know Houston plays great defense. We know Duke plays great offense. Duke is also elite defensively, and I think that's going to be the difference. Whereas Duke has answers to score on anyone, I don't know if Houston has answers to score on Duke. So this game could be tight, close for the first 20, 30 minutes, but ultimately that talent disparity, those guys who can just get buckets and make shots in the final 5 to 10 minutes of this game, I think will lead Duke to the victory. It's the defense of Duke that gets, I think, underrated when we talk about this team. Anita, come on in here. Curious your thoughts. On the other side, are you Florida or Auburn in that matchup?
Yeah, I like the Gators here for all the reasons I mentioned when we started the show. And this matchup against Auburn, listen, they already beat Auburn. In fact, they put up 90 points against Auburn not too long ago. They're a more balanced team than the Tigers, better defensively. As I said, 8th in the country in rebounding margin. What does that mean? Second chance opportunities, which I think is going to be an issue for Auburn. Elite 3-point defense, top 12 in the country, and also they've got the size to deal with Auburn's bigs. So I'm going to lay the points with Florida.
So I want to go back to a point Anita just brought up, that first meeting they had. It was back on February 8th, I believe. So between the first and only meeting between these two and Saturday's game, there's going to be a 56-game gap. 56 days between when they last met and when they meet on Saturday. When they last met, it was at Auburn. Auburn was laying 11. 11 points in that game. Now, they lost that game, and it's at Auburn, and we've seen Florida play outstanding basketball in the last 56 days as we lead up to this game. But you take all those factors together, and you're telling me we're moving this line 13.5 points? Adjusted, yes. Adjusted that much? I don't think so. Now, again, back to Auburn, the big storyline. I don't know if we can trust Auburn. Auburn's stumbling into the playoffs, stumbling into the tournament. Well, where are we at now? We're 4-0, 3-1 against the spread. They're winning these games by 12 points per game. Like yesterday, winning by 6 against Michigan State, that's a glory number with some late scoring from Michigan State to make it look good. Like, that was a blowout. They handled Michigan. They've taken out a lot of good teams. I feel like we've answered these questions, and yet we're still pricing them like we have a lot of questions. I'm looking to Auburn there.
It makes sense. I completely agree with the fact that I've been trying to find reasons for Auburn to get knocked out of this tournament and lose, and they just keep answering the bell. When I filled out my bracket, as far as game theory, I wanted to leave Duke and Florida out of the championship game because most people are going to have them there.
Correct.
But now that we've gotten to this point, I have to just succumb to what is happening with these two teams. Duke has the most talent, and Florida's probably the deepest, best team. So I'll add to my Duke money line in the Final Four a Florida money line. And you can parlay those two right now to get a Duke-Florida championship game matchup at ESPN BET plus 148. I'm willing to make that bet. I think that's a good price on the teams that most people coming into this tournament thought were the best, and so far have proven to be the best. And that's not a knock on Houston and Auburn, who've been great, but Florida and Duke just look like they have a different level than those two.
It gets you action on both games, right? Which is what you're going to want if you're recreational and you're having fun. So you've got 2 games in a row. You're going to have action on both. You're not going to have to worry about covering any numbers. You get 2 good games there. You're not going to have a huge risk in terms of what your overall investment is going to be, laying a big number like some of these draft props we'll be talking about here in the very near future. That's not the end of the world. If people want to go about playing that, it worked yesterday. It worked Saturday. Like the money line parlay with the favorites has been working.